In the medieval world, life was precious because it was fragile. The body was seen as a vessel of clay, easily broken, constantly threatened by forces both seen and unseen. Sickness lingered close at hand, and health was a blessing never taken for granted. Children knew frailty earliest. Many did not survive beyond infancy. Mothers whispered prayers as they rocked newborns, sprinkling holy water, tying charms at cradles. Each cough brought fear, each fever dread. To see a child live through early years was joy as much as relief. Adults bore scars of survival. Their hands were calloused from labor, their backs bent by toil, their teeth worn or missing. Illness struck without warning. Fevers, chills, coughs, and sows. Some recovered, others weakened for life. All lived with awareness that strength could vanish overnight. Theories of health explained fragility. Physicians spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. To be healthy was to be balanced. To be sick was to be imbalanced. Hot and cold, wet and dry, sweet and bitter, each food, each herb, each act tipped scale of body's harmony. Villagers repeated wisdom in proverbs. Too much heat breeds fever. Eat onions for strength, honey for health, garlic to drive away ill. Knowledge passed from mouth to mouth, shaping daily choices, guiding meals and remedies alike. The body was believed porous, open to airs and vapors. Foul smells were thought dangerous, carrying disease in invisible breath. Streets thick with refuse, swamps heavy with mist, markets reeking of fish. All were seen not only as foul, but deadly. Astrology, too, shaped understanding. The position of stars influenced illness. The moon tugged on humors as surely as on tides. Physicians cast horoscopes before bleeding patients. Midwives whispered phases of moon before births. Heaven and body were linked, woven in same pattern. Yet daily life offered little protection. Water was often foul, food sometimes spoiled, winters harsh, summers diseased, wounds festered, teeth rotted, eyes failed. People lived with pain as constant companion, rarely expecting long years without suffering. Children learned early to fear illness. They saw neighbors carried to churchyards, heard bells toll for plague, watched parents whisper prayers over fevers. They knew bodies failed, even young ones, and prayed for mercy in each Mass. The city magnified fragility. Crowded alleys spread coughs swiftly. Foul air thickened, vermin multiplied. A single fever might spread from one street to another, filling parish with weeping. Rural villages too suffered, but cities' press of bodies sharpened risk. The countryside bore its dangers differently. Harsh winters left children thin, harvest failures starved bellies, labor in fields bent bones. Rural bodies grew sturdy but weary, resilience hardened by toil, yet no less vulnerable to illness. Faith explained much. Illness was sometimes seen as trial, sometimes as punishment, sometimes as chance for repentance. Priests reminded sick to confess sins, to make peace with neighbors, to trust that suffering had meaning in eyes of God. Still, remedies were sought eagerly. People carried charms of saints, drank waters from holy wells, rubbed wounds with herbs, fasted or feasted according to advice. Each cure offered hope, each hope clung to, for no one wished to meet sickness without a fight. Mothers knew dozens of home remedies: chamomile for stomach, garlic for lungs, honey for wounds, vinegar for fevers. Some worked, some did not, but all were tried, for every effort meant love. Men sought stronger cures: bloodletting with leeches or knives, cupping with heated cups, purging with herbs or powders. Harsh treatments, often painful, were endured with hope of restoring balance. Fear of contagion shaped life. In times of plague, families locked doors, fled city, or left sick behind. Priests carried relics in procession, bells tolled unceasing, fires burned in streets to purify air. Fear hung as heavy as smoke. Even small wounds carried risk. A cut from scythe, a scratch from nail, a bite from dog, all could fester into fever. Limb lost, life ended. Children learned quickly to fear infection, though they had no word for it. Old age was a rare blessing. Wrinkled faces, bent backs, white hair were signs of survival as much as of years. Elders were respected not only for wisdom, but for rarity, proof that some bodies endured despite fragility. Stories told of miraculous cures, saints who healed with touch, relics that banished fever. These stories gave hope, carried from village to village, whispered at sickbeds, repeated in markets. Hope was medicine as much as herbs. And so, in medieval world, the body was understood as delicate balance, easily disturbed, constantly threatened. Illness was not surprise, but expectation, health not certainty, but grace. The fragile body shaped every life, every prayer, every family's memory. It taught patience, humility, and gratitude. To wake healthy was blessing, to sleep without fever was gift, to live long was miracle. Thus, medieval people lived close to frailty, closer than we do now. Their strength was in endurance, in laughter amid pain, in faith amid fear. Their bodies fragile, but their spirit resilient. In every village there was one figure sought, when sickness struck, when fevers burned, or when a birth drew near. She was the wise woman, healer, midwife, keeper of herbs and charms. Her knowledge did not come from books, but from fields, forests, and long memory. Her cottage often stood at edge of village, close to hedgerows and streams where herbs grew. Bundles of plants hung drying from rafters: sage, thyme, rosemary, lavender, fennel, yarrow. Their scents mingled with smoke of hearth, filling room with sharpness and sweetness alike. Children came shyly to her door, clutching coins or eggs as payment. Mothers followed with sick infants, men with wounds from fields, elders with aching bones. Each trusted thee, for her remedies were woven from nature itself. She knew which leaves soothed fevers, willow bark boiled in water eased pain, chamomile calmed stomachs, garlic drove away coughs, honey cleansed wounds, keeping rot at bay. Her knowledge passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, a lineage of care older than church or crown. But her wisdom was not only herbs. She spoke charms softly as she tied bandages, traced crosses in air, muttered prayers to saints. Healing was mixture of faith and leaf, of word and water. People believed both worked together, body and soul needing cure alike. In childbirth, the role was greatest. She soothed mothers, steadied hands, whispered courage. She brewed teas to ease pain, rubbed oils into skin, guided infants into world with patience learned from countless nights of labor. Candles burned, prayers whispered, her presence a shield between life and death. Yet her power drew suspicion. Priests sometimes frowned at her charms, calling them superstition. Neighbors whispered when cures failed, blaming witchcraft or ill will. Her closeness to life and death made her feared as well as needed. Still, she was sought in secret even by those who doubted. A priest might send servant for herbs against cough. A wealthy merchant's wife might call her to ease childbirth. She was at once mistrusted and indispensable. Her garden was living book. Rows of mint, sage, rue, and fennel grew beside door. In hedgerows she gathered nettles, dandelions, and elderflowers. In woods she cut bark and roots. In meadows she plucked blossoms. Each season brought new remedies. Each plant had purpose. Spring meant fresh greens for cleansing blood. Summer gave abundance of blossoms for teas and salves. Autumn yielded roots and berries, stored for winter fevers. Winter tested her stores, jars lined in rows, herbs ground into powders, oils sealed in flasks. Children watched her gather plants, learning by sight and smell. She crushed leaves between fingers, told which healed and which harmed. She warned of deadly nightshade, of foxglove's beauty hiding poison. Knowledge was survival, and ignorance could kill. Her cures carried ritual. She might cut herbs only at dawn, speak prayer as she picked, or gather root only when moon was high. Such practices blended magic and medicine, faith and folklore. To villagers they were part of cure as surely as plant itself. Payment was rarely coin alone. Eggs, bread, wool, or labor were given in thanks. Her role was woven into community, her care returned by gifts that kept her humble cottage alive. Stories grew around her. Some said she could foretell storms by watching clouds, or sense death before it came. Others claimed she spoke with birds or knew secrets of animals. Whether true or not, such tales deepened her mystery. Children feared and loved her. They whispered tales of witches at night, yet ran to her for honey when sick. She was at once grandmotherly and uncanny, embodiment of wisdom older than books. When plague struck, she brewed stronger potions, vinegar with herbs, posies of flowers to carry, smokes of juniper to cleanse air. Many still died, but some lived, and those who lived remembered her remedies with reverence. Sometimes she stood trial of gossip. If cows sickened, neighbors muttered her name. If harvest failed, some blamed it herbs. Yet when illness struck, those same neighbors knocked at her door begging help. Her life was fragile balance of fear and need. Her role as midwife bound her most deeply to families. She was there at first cries, wiping blood, whispering thanks to saints. She was there when mothers weakened, holding hands, praying. She was memory of birth itself, witness of life's threshold. Songs and sayings honored her work. No herb without its virtue, villagers said, repeating her wisdom. Children learn rhymes to remember plants, charms whispered half in play, half in reverence. Even priests softened in time, many came to see her as ally, her herbs complementing sacraments, her hands guided by providence. Some monasteries even welcomed her, trading seeds and knowledge, recognizing that God's creation healed as surely as prayer. At night, she sat by fire, grinding herbs with mortar, mixing salves, brewing teas. Candles flickered, shadows danced on rafters hung with plants. Her life was steady rhythm: gather, prepare, heal, pray. In old age, wisdom grew treasured. Villages brought daughters to learn, grandchildren to watch. Her memory became community's memory, her voice carried into future through those she taught. The wise woman embodied union of earth and spirit. Her hands held herbs, her lips prayers, her eyes compassion. She lived at edge of village, yet heart of life pulsed through her work. Thus the medieval world honored and feared her, trusted and doubted her, needed and whispered about her. She was healer, midwife, guardian of knowledge, keeper of hope. And so, in every village, the wise woman stood as a reminder that healing was as much mystery as medicine, as much faith as herb, as much love as knowledge. If the wise woman belonged to the village, the monastery held its own tradition of healing. Behind stone walls, amid gardens and cloisters, monks tended bodies as well as souls. They copied books of medicine, cultivated herbs, and cared for the poor. Their work a blend of prayer, discipline, and practical mercy. Every monastery had its infirmary. This was not a grand hall, but a long chamber lined with beds, straw mattresses covered in linen, wooden stools by each. Light streamed through narrow windows, candles burned by night, and crucifixes hung above. Here the sick brothers lay when fever or wounds overcame them. Monks cared for one another tenderly. Brothers washed brows with cool cloths, read psalms at bedsides, whispered prayers for healing. Meals were softened into broths, herbs brewed into teas. Silence reigned, broken only by prayer or gentle footsteps of caregiver. Yet monasteries did not care for monks alone. Travelers and beggars found rest in guest houses, and the ill were often brought to monastic infirmaries. Charity demanded that sick be sheltered, fed, and tended. Many who had nowhere else turned to monastery door in hope of mercy. Herb gardens grew within cloisters, beds lined neatly with sage, rue, fennel, rosemary, mint, chamomile, and dozens more. Monks studied their uses, following texts of Gale and Dioscorides, blending ancient wisdom with their own experiments. Each leaf was known, each root valued. The apothecary's chamber smelled richly of dried plants. Bundles hung from beams, jars lined shelves, mortars and pestles lay ready. Monks ground powders, mixed ointments, steeped tinctures. Recipes were copied in neat Latin script, preserved in manuscripts bound with leather. Medicine and faith mingled. A monk might prescribe fennel for stomach, honey for wound, garlic for lungs, but always with prayer. Healing was never seen as plant alone, but plant blessed by God, nature guided by Creator. Some monasteries became famed for skill. Pilgrims journeyed to their doors, seeking cures, hoping to touch relics as well as taste remedies. Word spread of monks who eased fevers, soothed sores, or saved lives when others failed. Care extended to mind as well. Brothers read scripture to the sick, sang psalms, told stories of saints' endurance. Patients were reminded that suffering could purify, that illness was path to humility, that even weakness had purpose. Infirmaras, monks chosen for healing duty, were trained carefully. They studied herbs, diets, bleeding, and baths. They observed patients closely, recording symptoms, testing remedies. Their duty was holy work, service to both body and soul. Bathing was often part of cure. Warm water eased joints, cleansed skin, and comforted spirit. Monks filled tubs, poured heated water, mixed herbs like chamomile or lavender. The act was both medicinal and merciful. And diet was medicine too. Broths of leeks and onions, honey mixed with vinegar, warm milk with herbs, bread softened in ale. Food was chosen not only for nourishment but for humoral balance, cooling or warming, drying or moistening as needed. Monks copied medical texts by candlelight. Ancient works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Arabic physicians were preserved in their hands. Illustrations showed herbs, diagrams of bodies, instructions for treatments. In this way, knowledge survived centuries of turmoil. Yet humility marked their practice. They knew cures often failed, prayers went unanswered, death came despite effort. Their task was what mastery but service, offering care in trust of God's will. When plague came, monasteries suffered terribly. Brothers fell ill one after another, infirmaries filled beyond measure. Yet still they tended one another, singing psalms as they died, faith stronger than fear. Many monasteries lost half their numbers, but those who survived carried memory of courage and loss. Pilgrims often brought gifts in thanks for healing, candles, coins, or relics. Monasteries grew in wealth and reputation through such gratitude, though monks saw it as offering to God, not themselves. Children sometimes came to monasteries for cures. A sick boy carried by mother, a fevered girl laid at infirmary bed. Brothers tended them gently, giving herbs, whispering blessings. Families remembered such mercy all their lives. Silence of cloisters soothed as much as remedies. Birds sang in gardens, fountains trickled, chants rose softly. The atmosphere itself healed, reminding sufferers that peace was possible even in pain. Monastic care influenced cities. Hospitals founded by guilds and bishops often followed monastic models, with herb gardens, chapels, and rules of discipline. The monastery spirit spread outward into wider world. Legends told of miraculous cures by saints once monks. Saint Benedict healing with prayer, Saint Hildegard of Bingen teaching virtues of herbs, countless others whose lives mixed devotion and healing. Their stories inspired future generations. At night, infirmaries glowed with candlelight. Brothers walked softly, checking beds, whispering prayers. Some patients slept peacefully, others moaned, others drifted toward death. All were held in care, none left alone. Thus the monastery stood as refuge of healing, herbs and prayers, books and baths, silence and mercy. It was a place where body and soul met in care, where fragility was met with compassion, and where healing, whether of flesh or spirit, was offered freely. And so monks and their healing hands preserved knowledge, gave comfort, and embodied faith. Their work was quiet, steady, humble, but its echo shaped centuries, carrying wisdom through dark time until light of learning rose anew. If monks healed with prayer and herbs, the Barber-Surgeon healed with blade. His shop smelled not of incense, but of blood and soap. His work marked not by chant, but by the scrape of steel. He was craftsman of flesh, part healer, part tradesman, part spectacle, and his place was as feared as it was sought. The Barber-Surgeon's sign was a pole painted with red and white. Red for blood, white for bandages, the mark of his trade. Outside his door, apprentices sharpened razors, polished knives, and set out basins of water. Inside, stools and benches waited for those bold or desperate enough to sit. His skills were many. He cut hair and shaved beards, but more importantly, he bled patients to balance humus. He lanced boils, stitched wounds, set broken bones, and pulled rotten teeth with iron forceps. His hands were strong, his tools sharp, his patients often groaning. Bloodletting was his most common task. A vein cut, blood flowing into basin, patient gripping chair as weakness spread. Some fainted, some wept, some claimed relief. To the barber-surgeon it was ordinary as bread. To a baker the body's balance restored with a few ounces of blood. Leeches were his allies. Kept in jars of water, they wriggled until placed on skin. They clung greedily, sucking until full, then dropped off, leaving small wounds behind. Patients shuddered, but many trusted the leech more than knife, its slow draw seen as gentler. Tooth pulling was roughest of all. A patient sat gripping arms of chair, mouth forced open, iron forceps clamped, twisted, yanked. Screams echoed, blood spurted, tooth held aloft in triumph. Pain was sharp but brief, relief sometimes lasting, sometimes leading to worse infection. Broken bones he bound with splints, wounds he stitched with coarse thread, burns he covered with ointments. His tools were simple, knives, needles, cups, cauteries, yet his work saved lives more often than it ended them. Crowds sometimes gathered for difficult tasks. Amputations, rare but real, drew onlookers. A limb crushed by wheel or severed by blade had to be cut away. Assistants held patient fast. Surgeon worked quick with saw. Heated iron sealed wound. The cries lingered in memory, but so too did survival. The barber-surgeon worked in noise, at silence. Patients groaned, apprentices shouted, steel clattered, crowds muttered. His was healing done in open air, visible and raw, not cloistered like monks' infirmaries. He learned by doing, that by book. Apprentices watched, fetched tools, wiped blood, practiced on animals before touching men. Each mistake marked in scars of patient, each success remembered as proof of skill. Payment was in coin, but also barter. A farmer gave eggs, a cobbler shoes, a brewer ale. Healing was trade like any craft, and surgeon lived by hands as surely as smith or cooper. Fear and trust mingled in his reputation. Some called him butcher, others savior. Those he cured praised him, those who died cursed his name. Yet his shop was always busy, for pain made courage out of desperation. Barber-surgeons also served armies. On battlefields they stitched wounds, set bones, and amputated shattered limbs. Their tents smelled of blood and sweat, cries of soldiers ringing. Without them, few survived long after combat. Townsfolk came for lesser needs too. A cut shaved clean, a boil lanced, a splinter removed. Not every visit was bloody, though blood was never far. Superstition entered even here. Some surgeons muttered prayers before cutting, or carried charms for steady hands. Others claimed skill alone was enough, their pride as sharp as knives they wielded. His tools were simple but fearsome. Knives honed thin, saws sharp-toothed, forceps heavy, cautery irons heated red. Jars of leeches, bowls for blood, cloths for binding. To see them laid out was to feel fear rise, even before pain began. Children whispered tales of barber-surgeons. They feared being taken for bleeding, laughed nervously at stories of teeth pulled, watched wide-eyed as patients left pale and trembling. The surgeon was figure of awe and dread. Sometimes failure was blamed on him. A wound festered, a fever grew worse, a patient died, and whispers followed. Yet others swore by his skill, pointing to limbs saved, lives preserved. His reputation was fragile, swinging between honor and suspicion. Markets rang with his cries. Bloodletting, teeth pulled, bones set, he advertised loudly, competing with sellers of herbs and charms. Some chose wise woman, some monk, some surgeon. Many tried all three in turn, desperate for cure. Though rough, his craft mattered. He eased pain, closed wounds, gave relief. He bore blood on hands so others might live. Crude though it seemed, it was bridge between ancient remedies and modern surgery. At night, he cleaned tools in firelight, sharpening knives, boiling cups, preparing for next day. Apprentices swept floor, washed cloths, carried away bowls of blood to dump in gutters. The work was unending, for sickness never slept. In death, his memory lingered in scars of survivors, a missing tooth, a healed cut, a limb saved or lost. His work etched itself into bodies, permanent record of his skill and failure alike. Thus the barber-surgeon stood as figure of medieval medicine, practical, bloody, necessary, and feared. He worked where monks hesitated, where herbs failed, where pain demanded blade. And so his pole stood in streets as symbol, red for blood, white for bandage, sign that healing might hurt, but healing was needed. His shop a place of pain, yet also of hope, the barber-surgeon a paradox, feared yet never without work. When herbs failed, when surgeons' knives brought no relief, when prayers in parish church seemed unanswered, there was still another hope. The sick, the maimed, the blind, and the weary turned to road of pilgrimage, seeking healing at shrines, holy wells, and relics. For many, the journey itself was cure as much as destination. Families prepared with care. A crippled man leaned on staff. A mother carried sick child in arms, a fevered youth wrapped in cloak. Neighbors pressed coins into hands, Priests blessed travelers, and they set forth, eyes fixed on distant saint. Roads filled with such seekers, they limped, they stumbled, they sang hymns through pain. Pilgrim staffs clattered, cockle shells gleamed on cloaks, badges pinned to hats. Every step was prayer, every mile sacrifice offered in hope of mercy. Shrines drew them from far and wide. St. Thomas at Canterbury, St. James at Compostela, countless local saints in chapels and crypts. Some journeys lasted days, others months, even years. Each shrine promised miracle, each relic shimmered with possibility of cure. Holy wells were favored, water believed blessed by saint's hand bubbled cool and clear. Pilgrims drank, washed souls, bathed limbs, filled flasks to carry home. Some claimed instant healing, others slow relief, still others only comfort of ritual. Relics were most powerful, a vial of saint's blood, a splinter of true cross, a bone in silver reliquary, each carried promise of healing touch. Pilgrims pressed close, kissed glass, touched cloths, tied tokens in thanks. The reliquary gleamed in candlelight, hope blazing as bright as gold. Stories spread like fire. A blind girl who saw after touching relic, a crippled man who rose and walked, a fever gone overnight. Such tales traveled faster than merchants' goods, drawing crowds, feeding faith. Yet not all were cured. Some returned as sick as they left, their hope unmet. Still many claimed comfort, that they had tried, that saint heard, that even in sickness they were blessed. The journey itself changed hearts. Along road, pilgrims prayed together, sang psalms, shared bread. Strangers became companions, suffering shared became lighter. Healing was not always of body, but of spirit, burdens carried in company. Markets grew near shrines, sellers offered candles, badges, ampullae filled with holy water, scraps of cloth touched to relic. Some mocked such trade, others saw them as tokens of faith, reminders to carry home. Hospitals lined pilgrimage routes, run by monasteries or guilds. They offered beds, broths, prayers. Sick were welcomed, tended, blessed. Even if cure was found, care was given. Children sometimes led parents, guiding blind mothers, steadying lame fathers. Their small hands carried great hope, their eyes shining with belief that saint would help. Their voices sang hymns sweeter for their innocence. Processions of pilgrims entered cities. Banners waved, candles burned, bells rang. Sick were carried on litters, blind led by ropes. Cripples hobbled on crutches. Crowds watched, some pitying, some mocking, but many joining in prayer. At shrine itself, emotion overflowed. Some wept, some shouted thanks, some fell silent. The weight of journey broke in tears, the hope of healing filled air thick as incense. Priests moved among pilgrims, blessing, absolving, guiding hands to relic. Cures were recorded, monks wrote names, illnesses, miracles claimed, books filled with testimonies, proving saints' power, drawing more pilgrims. Such records became treasure of church, proof of heaven's mercy on earth. But pilgrimage was not only miracle, it was penance, discipline, offering. To walk in pain, to kneel at shrine, to sleep on hard ground, these acts themselves were believed healing for soul. Even if body stayed frail, spirit was strengthened. Pilgrimage bound rich and poor alike. Nobles rode with retinues, peasants walked barefoot, merchants traveled with goods. At shrine all knelt together, humbled before saint, equal in need of mercy. Songs of pilgrims echoed on roads. Ultrea, forward on they sang to Santiago, Blessed Thomas, hear us, to Canterbury. Music itself was healing, words of faith carried in rhythm of walking feet. Children remembered such journeys all their lives. Even if no miracle cured them, the memory of candles, chants, and relics glowed within, giving comfort in later sorrows. Sometimes healing came not in sudden miracle, but in peace. Pain endured, but heart felt lighter. Fear remained, but courage grew. Body frail, but soul strong. Pilgrims called this healing too, blessing beyond cure. At journey's end, badges were worn proudly, a scallop shell from Compostela, a lead ampulla from Canterbury, a token from local saint, proof that one had walked, prayed, and hoped. They became heirlooms passed to children as memory of faith. Thus pilgrimage for healing was woven of faith and pain, of hope and journey. It gave comfort to sick, bound communities, filled cities with prayer and song. The road itself became shrine, each step sacrifice, each mile offering. Healing lay not only at end, but in journey itself, body and soul shaped by road beneath feet. And so, in medieval world, the sick sought saints as surely as surgeons, wells as eagerly as herbs. Their hope was never quenched, their journeys never wasted, for even without miracle they returned with faith renewed. Not all cures came from herbs or saints. In the shadows between faith and fear, people turned to charms, spells, and whispered words. Superstition wove itself into medicine, shaping lives with unseen powers, half trusted, half feared. Amulets were common, a small cross carved from wood, a relic seeming bone, a piece of parchment inscribed with psalm, each hung on cord around neck, tied at wrist, or hidden in clothing. Mothers tied charms on children, hoping to guard them from fevers and falls. Words themselves held power. Some whispered prayers of saints, as if spell, repeating names 3 times, or muttering Latin phrases learned by rote. The line between holy prayer and magical incantation blurred, both carrying weight of hope. Spells for healing often mixed herbs with words. A poultice of plantain was bound on wound while charm was spoken. Bone to bone, blood to blood, sinew to sinew, heal as Christ would. Words and leaves worked together, neither complete without the other. Superstition touched daily acts. A sick child's shirt might be turned inside out, fever cured by crossing running water thrice, toothache eased by burying tooth beneath threshold. Such acts may seem strange, but to medieval mind they held logic born of tradition. Astrology deepened mystery. Healers studied stars before bleeding, timing cuts to phases of moon or positions of planets. A wound stitched under wrong sign was thought to fester, medicine given at wrong hour to fail. Heaven's order was believed mirrored in body's health. Animals played part in cures. Wolf's tooth hung around neck for courage, hare's foot for luck, dove's heart burned to banish melancholy. Superstition made men trust in beasts as much as in saints. Witches were feared in this realm. When illness lingered, some whispered of curses, charms twisted to harm rather than heal. A cow's milk souring, a child wasting, a wound festering, all might be blamed on malice hidden in spell. Yet not all witches were malevolent. Many were simply wise women, healers mistrusted for knowledge beyond priest's blessing. The thin line between healing and witchcraft was walked daily. Trust and suspicion balanced on knife's edge. Children learned rhymes with power. To stop nosebleed, Christ was born in Bethlehem, water flowed in Jordan. Stop, blood, stop. Such words mix sacred and common, turning nursery verse into medicine. Superstition was strongest in plague. Posies carried to ward off foul air, charms tied to doors, fires lit to drive away spirits. People feared not only sickness, but invisible demons riding on winds. Dreams were read as omens of health. To dream of clear water was sign of recovery, of fire sign of fever, of bread sign of strength. Families clung to such signs, hope woven in sleep. Objects carried memory of cures. A pebble touched to shrine, a coin blessed by priest, a feather found at holy place, each pocketed, each treasured, each believed to carry power. Some cures demanded ritual. A wart rubbed with raw meat and buried at crossroads, sickness transferred into animal and driven from village, fevers beaten with willow rods. To modern eyes, strange, to medieval mind, necessary. Superstition carried comfort. When herbs failed and prayers seemed unanswered, a charm gave sense of control. It offered action against unseen forces, reminding people they were what helpless in face of illness. Yet priests often warned against it. Some denounced charms as devil's trick, urging trust only in sacraments. Still, many parishioners held both rosary and charm, prayed at altar and whispered spell at bedside. Faith and superstition lived side by side. Markets sold charms openly, rings against cramp, stones against madness, relic badges against plague. Merchants shouted their powers, pilgrims bought eagerly, poor treasured them as protection. Children imitated elders, tying threads around dolls, chanting rhymes to heal scratches, playing games that mimic spells. In their play, old traditions lived on, half jest, half belief. Even physicians sometimes indulged. Learned men might scorn charms in public, but many carried astrological charts, consulted phases of moon, or muttered Latin blessing as they cut. Science and superstition twined, inseparable. Tales of miracles mingled with spells. A fever broken by relic might also be credited to charm, a healing seen as work of saint or power of words. People cared less for source than for result. Superstition was not only fear but wonder. It filled world with meaning, made plants, stars, animals, and stones part of healing. Nothing was ordinary, all carried hidden power, waiting to be used. Thus charms and spells formed third thread of healing, beside herbs and prayer. They reminded medieval soul that unseen forces shaped life, that mystery dwelt in every corner, and that hope could be found in even strangest acts. And so the sick wore amulets, whispered charms, timed cures by stars, and placed trust in both cross and pebble, both saint and rhyme. In their world all worked together, body, soul, earth, and heaven, bound by words half magic, half prayer. Few words carried as much dread in the medieval world as plague. To hear it whispered was to feel one's heart sink, to see death's shadow fall across village or city before it arrived. When plague came, life itself seemed to falter. The Black Death of the 14th century became legend in its own time. It swept across lands with terrifying speed, carried by ships, rats, and fleas. But to those who lived through it, its causes were less clear. Some said foul air, some said poisoned wells, some said wrath of God. None doubted its power. It began with fever, then swellings rose in groin and armpit, black and swollen, painful to touch. Some bled from lungs, coughing red into cloths, others weakened within days. For many, death followed swiftly, too swift for remedies to matter. Cities suffered worst. Narrow alleys, crowded homes, and filth gave plague no obstacle. Bells tolled without ceasing, carts rolled through streets collecting bodies, graveyards filled until earth itself seemed to groan. Silence fell where once markets bustled, fear louder than cries of hawkers. Villages, too, were struck. Whole families died in days, cottages stood empty, fields left unplowed. Survivors whispered prayers over abandoned hearths, too few hands to bury dead. Some villages never recovered, fading from maps like smoke blown away. Priests led processions through streets, candles burned, relics raised, litanies sung to heaven. Feet trudged through dust, voices cracked with fear. People knelt, begging mercy, confessing sins aloud. Faith became louder, more desperate in face of death's advance. But fear twisted faith too. Some turned against neighbors, accusing them of sin or sorcery. Rumors spread of wells poisoned, strangers cursed. Hatred and panic joined plague as companions, cruelty feeding on fear. Doctors offered little. They carried posies of herbs, wore long-beaked masks, stuffed with spices, prescribed bloodletting or vinegar. Some burned fires in streets to cleanse air, others urged fleeing to countryside. Few cures worked, yet each was tried with hope. Children learned terror too soon. They saw parents weaken, neighbors vanish, cots of bodies pass. Songs once playful turned grim, ring o' roses, a pocket full of posies. Fragments of nursery rhymes carried memory of sorrow. Some fled to wilderness, leaving city behind. They slept in barns, in fields, in forests, hoping to escape poisoned air. Yet plague followed, unseen, striking wherever fear thought safe. Hospitals overflowed, monasteries filled with sick, monks and nuns tended without rest, many dying in service. Their courage was praised, their losses mourned, their names remembered as martyrs of mercy. Graveyards expanded swiftly, pits dug wide, bodies laid in rows, earth thrown hastily. Priests muttered prayers over heaps of dead, bells tolling endlessly. Survivors wept until voices failed, then wept again. Plague scarred memory of generations. Survivors carried grief in faces, silence in hearts. Some grew more devout, others turned bitter, convinced God had abandoned them. Faith and despair wrestled within each soul. Yet even in shadow, hope flickered. Some recovered miraculously strong, families rebuilt, villages repopulated, laughter returned, though quieter. Life proved stubborn, refusing to yield fully to death. The Black Death was not only a 14th century, plague returned in waves, decade after decade, century after century. Each outbreak reopened wounds, each toll of bell recalled old fear. Remedies multiplied. People wore charms, burned juniper, drank potions of vinegar and herbs, masks of herbs, fires in streets, pilgrimages to shrines. None proved certain, but all gave comfort. Art remembered plague in darker tones. Walls painted with danse macabre, skeletons leading kings, priests, and peasants alike in dance of death. Such images reminded all that death spared no rank, no wealth, no learning. Children grew up with these images. They learned that death was constant companion, that plague could come again. Their games, their songs, their fears carried echo of shadow. Plague reshaped society. With so many dead, fields lacked workers, wages rose, peasants found new strength. Power shifted subtly, society rebuilt itself upon bones of fallen. And yet, despite loss, life endured, marriages celebrated, children born, markets reopened, bells rang once more for joy as well as sorrow. Humanity's resilience proved greater than plague's shadow. In memory, plague became both terror and teacher. It reminded medieval soul of frailty, of need for faith, of fleeting nature of life. It carved humility deep into hearts, but also gratitude for every day survived. Thus, plague's shadow never left medieval mind. It haunted songs, paintings, prayers, and tales. But in that shadow also shone light, courage of healers, endurance of families, mercy of faith. And so the plague became part of healing's story, not as cure, but as trial. It shaped medicine, faith, and memory, teaching that even in darkest fear, life and hope could endure. If plague reminded medieval people of death's nearness, childbirth reminded them of life's fragile beginning. It was a moment of wonder and terror, of joy mingled with fear. For in those hours when child entered world, both mother and infant walked narrow road between life and loss. Midwives were guardians of this threshold. They were summoned at first pains, their footsteps hurried through night streets or across fields. At their arrival, households shifted, women gathered, men stepped aside, neighbors came to help. Midwife carried knowledge not in books, but in hands, in eyes, in memory of countless births witnessed. The birthing room was dim, warmed by fire, lit with candles. Herbs burned to cleanse air, prayers whispered to steady hearts. Cross hung above bed, holy water sprinkled at door. Fear and faith mingled in smoke and silence. The mother labored on stool or bed, supported by women's hands. Midwife murmured guidance, rubbed oils into skin, placed cloths warm with steam. Her voice calmed, her eyes watched closely. She was steady in storm of pain. Tools were few but precious. A birthing stool carved with handles, cloths boiled in water, herbs brewed for tea, oils for easing pain. Midwife's hands were truest tools, firm, gentle, ready to turn child, to catch life, to comfort mother. Hours stretched, cries filled room, prayers grew urgent. Women sang hymns, whispered charms. Saint Margaret, guard her, Holy Mary, guide her. Saints were called as if standing nearby, protectors unseen but present. At last the infant emerged, slippery, red, crying. Midwife lifted child, cut cord with knife, washed in warm water, wrapped in linen. A candle was lit, symbol of new life, flame fragile as breath. If child was weak, midwife acted swiftly. She rubbed chest with salt, whispered prayer, splashed holy water in emergency baptism. No child was left unblessed, for death could come within minutes. Faith demanded speed, mercy demanded action. Mother, too, was tended with care. Warm cloths soothed her, herbs eased bleeding, broths strengthened body. Yet many women weakened, some never rising from bed again. Death in childbirth was sorrow known to every village, every family. Midwives carried heavy burden. They brought life, but also bore witness to loss. They comforted grieving husbands, held motherless infants, prayed over still forms. Their hearts carried weight of both miracle and mourning. Yet their wisdom was honored. Communities trusted them, children blessed them, families repaid them with gifts of bread, wool, or coins. Their role was sacred as priests, though their altar was not stone but bedside. Superstition surrounded birth. Knots untied in house to ease labor, iron placed under bed to ward off spirits, charms spoken to protect mother. Each act was safeguard, every tradition shield against unseen dangers. Some midwives kept secret knowledge. They knew herbs to ease pain, but also herbs to prevent conception, whispered only to trusted women. Such secrets made them both valued and feared. Childbirth shaped family deeply. A son was joy, a daughter blessing, any infant miracle. Baptism followed swiftly, bells rang, godparents chosen. Yet fear lingered. Would child survive winter, fever, hunger? Every breath in cradle was gift. Women remembered midwife's presence all their lives, her hands steady in pain, her voice in darkness, her face first seen by newborn. She was woven into memory of family, her role never forgotten. Men, though absent from room, honored her too. They knew their wives' lives rested in her skill, their children's future in her care. Gratitude was silent but deep. Songs and prayers grew around childbirth. Some invoked Mary's own labor, some praised saints who guarded women, some whispered charms old as pagan days. These words carried comfort, linking each birth to larger story of faith and tradition. Communities shared in joy and grief. When birth succeeded, neighbors celebrated, gifts brought, feasts held. When death struck, bells tolled, silence fell, support given. Birth was never private, but woven into fabric of whole village. Midwives aged with wisdom. Wrinkles lined faces, hands grew stiff, but knowledge grew vast. Younger women came to learn, carrying tradition onward. Midwife's legacy lived not only in children she caught, but in women she trained. Thus, childbirth in medieval world was not only biological act, but sacred passage. It was surrounded by prayer, by tradition, by fear and faith together. It revealed fragility of life, but also resilience of women, strength of community, mercy of God. Every child born was miracle, every mother surviving warrior, every midwife keeper of wisdom as old as humanity. And so, in flicker of candles, in cries of labor, in whispered prayers, medieval birth revealed both peril and wonder, a threshold where life began, where love deepened, where hope renewed itself in sound of newborn's cry. In the medieval world, food was more than sustenance. It was remedy, prevention, and cure. Every meal was judged not only for taste or strength, but for its power to balance humors, to warm or cool, to dry or moisten. The line between kitchen and apothecary was thin, and diet was as important to healing as herbs or prayer. Physicians taught that body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each food influenced these humors. Bread from wheat was warm and moist, barley cooler and drier, wine heated, water cooled. Meat of lamb was gentle, beef heavy, pork rich and clogging. To eat was to choose medicine with every bite. Broths were staples of cure. A sick man might sip broth of leeks and onions, gentle on stomach, warming body. A woman weakened after childbirth might drink broth thickened with oats or lentils, strengthening and moist. Broths were easy to digest, carriers of herbs, comfort as well as cure. Honey was treasured, sweet, golden, and healing. It was stirred into drinks for fevers, spread on wounds to cleanse, mixed with herbs to soothe throats. Bees were seen as holy creatures, their honey gift of nature and symbol of purity. Garlic was medicine as much as food. It was eaten against coughs, rubbed on chest for colds, hung at doors towards sickness. Strong and pungent, it was believed to strengthen lungs and drive away bad air. Wine, too, was used in healing. It was mixed with herbs as tonic, poured on wounds to cleanse, sipped for strength. Red wine warmed the body, white cooled. Even when diluted, it was thought safer than foul water. Milk and dairy carried mixed views. Sweet milk of cow was nourishing but heavy, goat's milk lighter, sheep's richest. Butter soothed burns, cheese was thought clogging, cream indulgent. Each was judged for effect on humors. Spices were prized as medicines more than luxuries. Cinnamon warmed stomach, cloves eased toothache, nutmeg cheered heart, pepper cleared phlegm. Merchants sold them as remedies, apothecaries ground them into powders. To taste spice was to taste far-off cure. Vegetables were valued for cleansing. Leeks, onions, cabbage, and carrots filled stews. Nettles were gathered for spring blood cleansing. Dandelions for livers, fennel for eyes. Green plants were not only food of poor, but medicine of wise. Fruits carried humoral qualities. Apples cooled, pears moistened, cherries cheered, grapes strengthened blood. Dried figs and raisins restored energy. Prunes eased bowels. To eat fruit was both pleasure and prescription. Fasting was also healing. By abstaining from meat or rich foods, body was believed to rebalance itself. Lent became rite not only of devotion, but of cleansing, easing humors with fish, bread, and vegetables. Illness often changed diet. A fevered man was fed little but bread soaked in water or wine. A weak child given thin porridge sweetened with honey. An elder with failing teeth ate soft stews and broths. Food was adjusted to sickness, not sickness forced to endure food. Monks recorded diets in medical texts. They noted which foods strengthened, which harmed, which suited which season. Winter called for warming meals of meat and ale, summer for cooling dishes of fruit and fresh greens. Eating was matched to rhythm of year as well as body. Children learned early that food was medicine. Mothers told them to eat garlic for lungs, onions for strength, honey for health. Refusal met not only scolding but fear, for to reject food was to reject healing. Feasts, too, were measured by medicine. Rich foods eaten rarely, for too much roast meat or sweet spiced cake upset humors. Even nobles knew excess carried sickness, though they often ignored warnings in delight of table. Herbal drinks were daily remedies. Teas of chamomile for sleep, mint for stomach, sage for memory, rosemary for strength. Brewing pot of herbs was as common as baking loaf of bread. Household medicine always near at hand. Eggs were praised for nourishment, soft-boiled for sick, poached for weak, raw mixed with wine for vigor. Yolks warmed, whites cooled, balance even within shell. Fish fed body gently. River fish for poor, salted herring for fasting days, fresh salmon for feast. Fish was thought cooling, suited to hot humors, balancing rich meats of festivals. Food also healed spirit. A shared loaf cheered sorrow, a sweet cake brought joy, a warm drink comforted fear. Medicine was not only in humors but in heart, and taste of kindness often cured as much as herbs. In plague years, people carried posies of herbs, chewed cloves, drank vinegar. Food became shield, a way to resist unseen death. Few were saved, but many found courage in act of eating what was believed protective. In hunger years, food itself was medicine by rarity. A bowl of porridge, a crust of bread, a mug of ale, each bite life renewed, each sip body restored. Scarcity made clear that medicine's first form was nourishment. Thus, food in medieval world was never ordinary. It was measured, judged, prescribed, blessed. Each meal could heal or harm, each bite chosen with care. The kitchen was pharmacy, the hearth apothecary, the table hospital. Mothers, monks, and physicians alike agreed to eat wisely was to live longer, to eat foolishly was to fall sick. And so food as medicine bound body and spirit, hunger and healing, taste and cure. It filled bowls and hearts alike, reminding medieval soul that life's first doctor was bread itself. Every healer, whether monk, barber-surgeon, or wise woman, carried tools of craft. Their bag was treasure chest and arsenal, filled with items humble yet powerful. To open it was to glimpse the art of medieval medicine, half science, half ritual, wholly bound to hope. The bag itself was leather, worn smooth, heavy with use. Straps buckled tight, its seams carried scent of herbs and iron, smoke and beeswax. When healer entered cottage or market square, all eyes went to bag, for within lay chance of cure. Inside were knives sharp and slender, some for lancing boils, some for cutting veins, some for trimming flesh around wound. Their edges gleamed, their handles worn by countless grips. Each carried fear as much as relief. Leeches wriggled in jars of water, dark and hungry. Healer lifted them with care, placing on swollen skin to draw blood. People shivered at sight, yet trusted their slow suction more than knife's quick cut. Cupping vessels lay ready, small glass or horn cups, heated by flame, pressed to skin to draw blood and humors. They left red circles, strange marks of cure. To see them lined on shelf was to know healer's trade by sight. Needles and thread waited for wounds, thick and crude by modern eyes, yet strong enough to hold flesh closed. Healer's hands moved swiftly, stitching skin like cloth, each knot prayer for survival. Salves and ointments filled jars, beeswax blended with herbs, oil steeped with flowers, powders mixed with wine. Some cooled burns, others eased pain, some fought festering. Their scents ranged from sweet lavender to sharp vinegar, each distinct. Powders were wrapped in parchment, ground roots, dried berries, minerals pounded fine, some swallowed in drink, others blown into wounds, others sprinkled on cloth. The bag rustled with crackle of these fragile packets. Bandages filled corners, linen strips torn from old cloth, boiled for cleanliness, rolled tight. Healer wrapped wounds layer by layer, binding flesh and spirit in care. Herbs dried and bundled lay within too. Sage, thyme, rosemary, chamomile, each labeled with memory, not ink. Healer knew which leaf eased fever, which soothed stomach, which chased melancholy. A mortar and pestle often accompanied bag, heavy stone, worn smooth, ready to grind leaves into paste, seeds into powder. Its sound was music of healing, steady rhythm of preparation. Small vials of holy water, relic fragments, or blessed salt, sometimes nestled among tools. For healer knew faith worked alongside herb and blade. These sacred items comforted patients, strengthened trust, and soothed souls. Some healers carried astrological charts folded in leather case. They consulted stars before bleeding, checking moon's phase, planet's hour. To them no cut should be made without heaven's approval. Teeth-pulling tools, crude iron forceps, lay ready for agony of rotten molars, their jaws clamped tight, their pull swift, leaving both pain and relief. Patience dreaded sight, yet came nonetheless. Burning irons for cautery gleamed blackened at ends. Heated red, pressed to wound, they sealed blood, killed rot, left scars. Their hiss was sound of both terror and survival. Under tuplands, nestled in bags, small collections of remedies, lists of herbs, prayers for healing, pages stained with smoke and oil, their margins filled with notes. For even practical healers sought wisdom beyond memory. Children stared wide-eyed when healer opened bag. They whispered of wonders inside, feared leeches, marveled at knives. To them, bag was both magical and frightening, symbol of mysteries beyond ordinary life. Villagers recognized healer by clink and rattle of bag. Its sound meant aid had come, whether for fevered child, bleeding wound, or laboring mother. Its presence was hope, however rough its contents. Healers guarded bags carefully. Tools were costly, herbs precious, vials sacred. To lose bag was to lose livelihood, to lose power of healing. Each item carried stories. Knife that cut fevered vein, leech that drew sickness, salve that eased burn, relic that calmed spirit. Bag was not only filled with objects, but with memories of lives touched. Apprentices learned first by carrying bag. They fetched herbs, cleaned knives, boiled bandages, filled jars. Step by step, bag became theirs, inheritance of craft passed hand to hand. Even in death, healer's bag remained symbol, sometimes buried with them, sometimes kept by family, sometimes given to next healer. It marked life devoted to service, however flawed, however imperfect. Thus, the healer's bag embodied medieval medicine itself. It held blade and herb, prayer and charm, science and superstition. It carried fear and faith alike, bound together in leather strap. And so, when healer entered room, all eyes turned to bag. Its opening was moment of tension, for within lay both pain and promise. It was not miracle chest, but it was what they had, and it was enough to give hope. In the medieval world, the word hospital did not mean only a place of surgery or cure. It meant house of mercy, house of hospitality. A hospital sheltered sick, poor, orphan, widow, and pilgrim alike. It was roof for weary, bread for hungry, and prayer for dying. Healing of body and soul walked hand in hand within its walls. Many hospitals stood near churches or monasteries. Their halls stretched long, lined with rows of beds or pallets. Whitewashed walls reflected candlelight. Crucifix hung at head of hall, and altar stood where priest might celebrate mass for sick. The air smelled of herbs, wood smoke, and humanity. Steaming broths carried from kitchens, ointments prepared in side rooms, incense burned in chapel. Voices of prayer mingled with coughs and groans. Sick were admitted not by coin alone. Charity demanded that poor be cared for, even when pockets were empty. A beggar at gate, a pilgrim too weak to walk, a child with fever, all found place. Straw mattress, blanket, bowl of soup. Nuns often tended patients. Their veils rustled as they moved quietly from bed to bed, washing brows, changing bandages, spooning broth. Their work was devotion, service to Christ in guise of sick. To care for poor was to care for him. Brothers too served. Monks carried water, ground herbs, read psalms at bedsides. Lay servants fetched firewood, swept floors, washed sheets. All labor was part of mercy, no task too small when done for sick. Hospitals sheltered pilgrims on long roads. Weary travelers, their feet blistered, bodies thin, found rest. Beds filled with those on way to Compostela, Canterbury, or Rome. Pilgrim badges glittered faintly in firelight, proof of journeys walked for hope and healing. Some hospitals were grand, funded by kings or bishops. They had stone halls, tiled floors, painted chapels, fountains in courtyards. Others were humble, wooden, draughty, with only few beds. Yet whether rich or poor, each stood as sign of charity. Children were often seen within. Orphans found shelter, fed and clothed, taught prayers. Abandoned infants left at door were baptized, cared for, sometimes adopted. The hospital was parent when none else remained. At night, candles burned low. Nuns whispered prayers as patients slept fitfully. Some groaned, some wept, some slipped quietly into death. Bells tolled softly, marking passing of souls, reminding all that hospital cared, not only for life but also for end. Meals were simple but nourishing. Bread dipped in broth, ale watered down, pottage of peas or beans, sometimes fish. Meat was rare, given to those most weak. Yet even simple food was blessing to hungry. Medicine was given as best as could be. Salves rubbed on sauce, herbs brewed for fever, wounds washed in wine, bandages changed. Remedies varied, success uncertain, but care itself gave comfort. Prayer was constant, masses said for sick, relics carried through halls, blessings whispered at bedsides. Healing was sought as much from heaven as from earth. For many, cure was miracle, but mercy itself was gift enough. Hospitals also served dying priests anointed with holy oil. Nuns held hands, candles lit. Death was faced not alone, but with prayers rising, with crucifix held close, with community present. Charity shaped hospitals deeply. Wealthy donors gave lands or coin, leaving legacy of care. Guilds sponsored wards for members. Kings founded houses for poor. To give to hospital was to give to God. Charity for salvation of soul. Walls often bore paintings of saints healing sick, Christ as Good Samaritan, Mary comforting sorrowful. Such images lifted eyes from suffering to hope, reminding all that care was holy. Children of poor remembered hospitals all their lives, a warm bed after cold road, a kind hand in fever, a bowl of broth when hungry. Such memories lingered, shaping faith in mercy. Hospitals taught community value of compassion. They reminded townsfolk that strength must serve weakness, wealth aid poverty, health care for sickness. They embodied love as command, not choice. Even in plague, hospitals did not close. They filled beyond capacity, nuns and monks dying beside patients. Their sacrifice stood as testament to faith, mercy unbroken even as death pressed hardest. Hospitals left mark not only in lives saved, but in hearts touched. They stood as beacon of mercy, proof that amid suffering love endured. And so medieval hospitals, whether grand or humble, served as houses of healing and hope. They offered not perfection but presence, not cure but care, not riches but mercy. They taught that charity itself is medicine, that to share bread and prayer is healing, that in giving to weakest, community is strengthened. Their legacy lives not only in stone ruins, but in idea that care for sick is holy duty. Thus, hospitals were more than buildings. They were embodiments of compassion, houses where love became flesh, where Christ was seen in faces of poor, and where healing flowed as much from kindness as from herb or knife. For all the herbs gathered, all the prayers whispered, all the knives wielded and remedies brewed, sickness often ended not in healing, but in death. In the medieval world, death was never far, at cradle, at hearth, in field, in hospital. To face it was part of life, and to give it meaning was part of faith. When sickness deepened, families gathered close. Children hushed, neighbors came, priests summoned. The sickbed became altar, room filled with prayers, voices low, candles lit. Faces watched in silence, knowing breath might falter at any moment. Priest brought sacraments, confession heard, absolution spoken, holy oil anointed on brow and hands, the host placed gently on tongue, last taste of bread before eternity. Even weakest lips tried to whisper, Amen. This rite, the last sacrament, prepared soul as body failed. Relics were placed by bedside, a cross, a saint's bone, a vial of holy water. Hands clutched beads of rosary, voices murmured Hail Marys. Faith wrapped sick in comfort greater than blanket. Children cried softly, spouses wept, neighbors whispered. Yet grief mingled with reverence, for death was not only sorrow but passage, a return to God. To die well, with sacraments received, was seen as victory, not defeat. The body, once still, was washed by loving hands. Shroud wrapped around, candles burned, bells tolled. Villagers filed in, offering prayers, crossing themselves as they passed. Death was communal, shared by whole parish. Funeral processions wound through streets, coffin borne on shoulders, priest leading with cross, choir boys chanting psalms. Neighbors followed, heads bowed, carrying candles. The church received dead as it had once received newborn, with ritual and prayer. Graves dug in consecrated earth, marked with cross or stone. Families wept, earth shoveled, prayers sung. Bells tolled again, not for fear but remembrance, voice of church binding sorrow into ritual. Memory lived on in prayers for souls. Each mass remembered dead, each feast of all souls filled churches with names whispered. Families lit candles yearly, children taught to pray for grandparents, neighbors never forgotten. Death, though feared, was softened by hope. Heaven promised healing beyond sickness, eternal life beyond frailty. Paintings showed saints radiant, bodies whole, paradise green and bright. These images comforted, promising that death was at end. Stories of visions encouraged faith. Some told of souls seen ascending in light, others of ghosts returning to thank those who prayed. Such tales made unseen world feel near, comfort in grief. Cemeteries stood beside churches, so that living and dead dwelt close. Villagers passed graves daily, crossing themselves, remembering. Death was not hidden, but part of life's rhythm, reminder of fragility and faith alike. Children grew up with this closeness. They played among tombs, heard bells toll often, learned early that death was neighbor. Their games, their rhymes, their fears carried echo of mortality. Illness that ended in death was not seen as failure of healer. It was God's will, saints' calling, life's natural course. Families grieved but also accepted, their sorrow carried within faith. Yet not all deaths were peaceful. Plague, famine, sudden wounds left many unprepared. Priests hurried to bedsides, families cried prayers too late. These deaths haunted, their memory heavy. Still, masses offered, candles lit, names read aloud, community carrying what individual could not. Art remembered death vividly. Walls painted with skeletons, dances of death where kings and peasants alike were led by bones. Such images taught humility, reminding all that no rank escaped end. But alongside grim art were tender ones, Mary holding souls in mantle, Christ lifting dead from graves, angels guiding children. Such pictures comforted, teaching that love followed even into shadow. For medieval soul, hope was stronger than despair. Each death renewed community's prayer. Each loss deepened bond among living. Each grave reminded of eternity. Death taught patience, gratitude, mercy, and faith. And so, though sickness often ended in loss, memory and hope endured. The dead were not forgotten, but named, prayed for, honored. Their presence lingered in bells, in candles, in whispered prayers at night. In this way, medieval's story didn't end with death, but continued in memory. Healing was found in care given, in prayers spoken, in love that endured beyond grave. Body failed, but spirit healed. Thus, medieval people faced sickness with courage, death with reverence, and memory with hope. Their world fragile, yet their faith strong. Their lives brief, yet their meaning lasting. And so, the story of healing closes not with despair, but with promise that love is stronger than frailty, that faith endures beyond sickness, and that hope glows like candle in darkness, unquenched even by death. War was sickness of another kind, and its wounds demanded healers as surely as fevers did. On battlefield where arrows flew and swords struck, men fell bleeding in heaps, and those who survived first clash often faced slower death unless tended swiftly. Barber-surgeons followed armies, their bags heavy with knives, saws, ointments, and bandages. They set up tents near camps, rough shelters of canvas and wood, smoke rising from fires that heated water and irons. Their work began as soon as horns ceased, when cries of victory mingled with moans of wounded. Arrows were most common wound, shafts lodged in flesh, sometimes clean, sometimes splintered. Surgeons gripped with forceps, pulled with steady hand, sometimes arrow barbed, tearing more as it left. Men bit down on leather, groaned into cloth, or fainted as steel was drawn from body. Blades left deeper marks. Sword cuts gaped wide, blood pouring. Surgeon pressed cloths, poured wine to cleanse, stitched flesh with coarse thread. Scars remained for life, proud and painful memories of battle. Crushed bones from maces and hammers demanded splints. Wood and cloth bound limbs, crude but firm. Some healed crooked, some never healed, but splint gave chance where none otherwise. Worst of all were wounds beyond repair, a limb shattered, flesh rotted with gangrene, soldier fevered with poison of decay. Then surgeon reached for saw, assistants held man down, prayers muttered, iron cut quick. Heated cautery sealed stump, smell of burning flesh filled tent. Cries echoed far, but life sometimes saved. Blood flowed endlessly in such places. Surgeons worked with hands slick, cloths piled, basins full. Apprentices fetched water, stoked fires, sharpened blades. No silence here, but shouts, groans, clatter of tools, and wails of men. Faith was present even in gore. Soldiers clutched crosses, kissed relics, whispered prayers. Surgeons prayed as they cut. Nuns sometimes moved among wounded with bowls of broth, whispering comfort as bodies shook. Not all wounds were visible. Smoke of battle left lungs raw, fear haunted sleep, grief weakened heart. Priests heard confessions, gave absolution, reminded soldiers that courage in pain was as holy as courage in pain. was as holy as courage in fate. Battlefields after combat were grim, fields littered with corpses, groans rising from heaps of wounded. Healers moved from man to man, choosing whom to save, whom to leave. Choices cut deeper than knives, mercy measured in who received care. Water carried in skins, poured into parched mouths, bread softened in broth fed to weak. Even smallest act, washing face, binding cut, gave hope amid ruin. Some soldiers carried their own charms, wolf's tooth against fear, saint's medal against wound, parchment prayer tucked in pouch. Many believed such tokens turned blade aside or guided arrow away. Faith steadied courage when steel alone could not. When night fell, tents glowed with firelight. Men groaned in dark. Surgeons worked by flicker of torches, assistants holding shadows at bay. The smell of smoke and blood filled camp, mixed with incense from chaplains' prayers. Songs sometimes rose, soft and trembling. Wounded soldiers sang hymns together, voices broken but steady, comfort in unison. Music healed spirit when body lay shattered. Some never left battlefield alive. Their last sight was surgeon's face, last sound prayer whispered in ear, their bodies buried hastily, crosses scratched in earth, names spoken in memory. Others carried scars home, missing limbs, twisted arms, blind eyes, limps that lasted lifetime. These men lived reminders of war's cost, their wounds visible lessons for villages. Communities honored such survivors. They told stories of courage, treated scars as badges, listened to tales of battle. Yet beneath honor lay pain unending, bodies never whole again. Battlefield healing shaped medicine too. Surgeons learned quickly, tested remedies under fire, found what worked by necessity. Knowledge gained in war often carried home, spread through towns, refined in peace. Children sometimes watched fathers return with wounds, saw missing limbs, heard groans in night. They grew knowing fragility of flesh, respecting surgeon's role, fearing battle's price. Legends told of miraculous healings, a knight pierced through heart yet lived, a soldier cured by relic touch, a saint appearing in camp to heal wounds. Such tales gave hope, teaching that heaven fought beside men. But behind legend was truth. Healers bent over wounds, sweat dripping, hands steady, knives sharp. Their labor was gritty, endless, and often thankless, but it saved lives. Thus, healing in battle was mixture of courage and horror. Knives and saws worked beside prayers and tears. Faith gave strength where medicine failed. Love carried men through when body broke. And so battlefield healers stood as silent warriors, fighting not with swords but with bandages, not to take life but to save it. Their work was raw mercy, as sacred as mass, as necessary as steel. For all the herbs gathered, for all the blades wielded, for all the broths and charms and remedies, medieval people believed there was one sickness deeper than any fever, the sickness of the soul. To heal body was mercy, but to heal spirit was salvation. Priests stood as physicians of spirit. Their tools were what knives or herbs, but words, prayers, sacraments. When villagers confessed sins, they sought healing not of flesh, but of heart, believing sin weighed as heavily as wound. Confession was seen as cleansing, kneeling before priest, whispering failures, tears running. It was purging of sickness within. Absolution was balm, penance medicine. To pray 10 paternosters, to fast 3 days, to give bread to poor, these were prescriptions for soul's balance restored. Penance was discipline of healing, just as bitter herb cured stomach, hard task cured spirit. Pilgrimage, fasting, almsgiving, each was medicine for inner frailty. Pain endured, hunger accepted, miles walked barefoot. These were more punishment only, but cure. Fasting linked body and spirit. To deny meat, wine, or sweet was to sharpen soul, to cleanse humors, to turn heart to God. Lent became both dietary and spiritual medicine, humbling rich and poor alike. Pilgrimage was greatest of remedies. To walk weary miles, to kneel at shrine, to touch relic, these acts cleanse soul more deeply than herb cleanse blood. The journey itself was medicine, each step prayer, each hardship healing. Monks taught that prayer itself was cure. Chants at dawn steadied mind, psalms at night soothed grief. To repeat words of Scripture was to bind wounds unseen, to heal despair, to strengthen patience. Sickness often drove people to confession. Fever reminded of sin. Weakness revealed mortality. Priests urged sick to prepare soul even as body failed. To forgive enemies, to speak truth, to make peace. Healing of soul became final act before death. Holy water sprinkled, relics touched, oil anointed, each sacrament bound body and spirit together. They gave comfort, eased fear, and promised wholeness in life beyond. Superstition played role here too. Some tied sins to knots in cord, cast cord into river, believing guilt washed away. Others carried parchment prayers, believing words shielded heart. Even if in doctrine these acts gave comfort. Communities sought healing together. Processions of penitents walked barefoot, scourging backs, chanting litanies. Their bodies suffered, but spirits strengthened. Towns believed such acts lifted plague, eased famine, calmed heaven's anger. Children learned that forgiveness healed. They were taught to apologize, to pray, to seek blessing. Even small quarrels settled by prayer, teaching that peace was health of soul. Stories told of saints who healed not only bodies but hearts. Saint Francis calming despair, Saint Hildegard guiding spirits with visions, St. Augustine teaching power of repentance. Their words echoed through generations, reminders that soul could be mended. Music itself was seen as balm for spirit. Chants in cloisters, hymns in churches, bells tolling, each lifted mind from sorrow, healed grief with harmony. Sound was medicine, unseen yet powerful. When death came, healing of soul was most important. Sacraments given, prayers said, forgiveness sought, these were last remedies. Even if body failed, soul was prepared, healed for eternity. Thus, in medieval thought, healing was never only flesh. A broken bone mended, a fever soothed, but unless heart turned to God, healing incomplete. True cure meant salvation, eternal life beyond. Villagers carried this belief daily. They prayed not only for strength of limbs, but for patience, mercy, kindness. To live well was to be healthy, to sin was to be sick, to repent was to be healed. Festivals of forgiveness reminded this truth. Feasts of All Souls, processions of Lent, confessions before Easter, all were rituals of communal healing, whole villages cleansed together. Even physicians admitted spirit's role. They prescribed not only herbs, but peace of mind, avoidance of anger, presence of joy. They knew laughter healed as surely as honey, sorrow harmed as much as wrought. Families practiced healing of soul at home, evening prayers together, blessings before meals, forgiveness after quarrels. These daily acts bound hearts, kept sickness of spirit from festering. Children remembered lessons of mercy as much as herbs. They learned to heal hurt feelings, to share bread, to comfort sorrow. Such acts were medicine as vital as broth or salve. Thus, healing of soul gave meaning to suffering. Illness became trial of patience, pain became offering, death became passage. Faith transformed weakness into strength, despair into hope, loss into love remembered. And so medieval medicine was not only herb and knife, but prayer and sacrament. Healing of soul was final chapter of cure, deeper than flesh, lasting beyond grave. The fragile body could fail, the wise woman's herbs could wither, the surgeon's blade could slip, but soul healed endured forever. In this truth, medieval people found strength to endure. Thus their story of medicine closes not with despair of death, but with light of eternity. Healing of soul promised wholeness beyond sickness, peace beyond pain, life beyond death. Childhood in the medieval world was fragile. Infants were born into a world of risk, where fever could rise suddenly, coughs linger for weeks, and hunger weakened small bodies more quickly than adults could bear. Every parent knew that life's earliest years were uncertain, yet it was precisely in this fragility that love and care shone most brightly. Mothers were often the first healers. They rocked cradles by firelight, whispering lullabies that carried both comfort and prayer. A fevered child might be given honey stirred into warm water, or a cloth soaked in chamomile laid gently across brow. Herbs gathered in meadows, fennel, plantain, thyme, became simple remedies brewed in small pots and cooled before being offered to tiny lips. A mother's touch, steady and tender, was considered medicine in itself. Her voice, soft and rhythmic in the dark, soothed restless dreams as surely as any herb. Fathers, too, bore part of the burden. They were the ones who walked hurriedly through night to fetch wise woman from the village edge, or carried sick child wrapped in cloak to parish priest for blessing. Some carved charms from wood, small crosses to hang above cradle. Others fetched holy water from church, sprinkling drops over sleeping infant while murmuring prayers of protection. Their strength, so often spent in fields or workshops, bent here toward the frailty of their children. Midwives, who had first guided infants into the world, often returned when sickness struck. They knew how to rub limbs with warmed oils, how to prepare teas to ease colic, how to cradle fragile heads with skill born of long years. Their knowledge was woven from practice, memory, and the traditions of countless women before them. Families trusted them not only to deliver life, but to guard it in those tender early days. Faith stood beside medicine in every cradle. Garlic hung near bedposts to ward off evil. A saint's image was pinned to swaddling cloth. Families prayed to St. Nicholas or St. Margaret, saints believed to watch especially over little ones. Candles burned through long nights, flames flickering as parents whispered promises and pleas, hoping their child would see another dawn. Seasons shaped sickness. Winter brought coughs that echoed in rafters. Spring dampness carried fevers. Summer heat brought flux of the stomach. Autumn chills carried weakness in bones. Every turn of year tested children, and each season taught parents remedies suited to its dangers. Sweetness was medicine of childhood, honey treasured by all, soothed throats and cheered spirits. Syrups made from violets or rose petals eased pain and carried comfort. Even in illness, the taste of sweetness brought faint smiles to children's faces, reminding parents that joy had not entirely fled. Play, too, was seen as part of healing. When fever lifted and strength returned, children were given spinning tops, dolls of cloth, whistles of wood. Laughter rang again in courtyards, a sign more certain than any remedy that health had returned. Yet not all children survived. Families buried small coffins, carried to churchyard by fathers with trembling hands. Bells tolled softly, and the entire village gathered, for the loss of one child was sorrow of all. Graves were marked with simple crosses, names spoken in masses, prayers continued for souls believed safe in heaven. Grief was heavy, but hope in eternal life gave fragile comfort. Still, for every loss, there were children who grew strong. They carried memories of sickness survived, scars of childhood fevers, stories told by parents of nights kept in prayer. They grew into adults who cherished their own children fiercely, repeating remedies, songs, and blessings as they had once received. Thus, healing in childhood was more than herbs and charms. It was mother's lullaby, father's carved cross, midwife's steady hands, priests' whispered prayer, neighbors' offered broth. It was community gathered around the most fragile, binding together in mercy and hope. And though childhood was uncertain, every breath was treated as gift, every cure a miracle, every smile after fever a triumph. In that fragile balance, medieval families found the deepest meaning of healing, love guarding life, as candle flame guards against night. Illness in the medieval world was never born alone. When one member of a household fell sick, neighbors noticed, family gathered, and community answered. Healing was not only the work of wise woman, monk, or surgeon, but of everyone whose heart was bound to the sufferer. When fever struck, neighbors carried broth in earthen bowls, loaves of bread, or bundles of herbs tied with string. Women came to sit at bedside so that weary mothers might rest, and children fetched water from wells. A sick child or elder was never the burden of one home alone, but of the village as a whole, for all knew that tomorrow it might be their turn to need the same mercy. Guilds cared for members in towns and cities. A weaver fallen ill could count on fellow craftsmen to bring food to his family, while guild chaplains visited bedsides with blessings. Some guilds even kept common funds to pay for burials when death came, ensuring no man was left dishonored for want of coin. Healing was thus woven not only of herbs and bandages, but of solidarity, a net of care stretched across streets and squares. Church bells marked times of prayer for sick. At Vespers, candles were lit, names spoken aloud, villagers kneeling together for mercy. When plague or famine struck, whole communities walked in procession, barefoot in dust, chanting litanies with candles in hand. To pray together was to heal together, even when body remained frail. Markets, too, became places of shared healing. Women exchanged recipes for poultices while bartering for flour. Men swapped news of which herb had eased fever, and mothers traded charms said to protect cradles. Knowledge of remedies spread not through books alone, but through gossip, story, and song. In this way, healing was collective memory, preserved not on parchment, but in mouths of people. Children learned of mercy early. They watched mothers tend neighbors, saw fathers carry sick men from fields, helped fetch wood for fires kept burning through long nights. Compassion was part of their upbringing, a skill as vital as plowing or weaving. Healing, in this sense, was inheritance, passed as naturally as language. Festivals, too, carried thread of community healing. On feast days, after prayers for saints, villages shared meals where poor ate beside rich. Food strengthened bodies, Laughter lifted spirits, music eased hearts weary with work and worry. Such moments reminded all that joy itself was healing, as necessary as any herb. Hospitals were another form of community mercy. Supported by donations, they welcomed sick, poor, orphan, and pilgrim. Families who could not afford surgeons or medicines still found beds, broths, and prayers within walls raised by charity. In this way, even those with nothing found dignity in care, and towns as a whole grew stronger through their giving. Even death was communal. Neighbors dug graves, rang bells, carried candles in procession. They mourned only for family, but for friend, not only for friend, but for stranger. Grief was shared, making it lighter to bear, and hope was renewed in voices singing psalms together. Healing of community itself came through such acts. The sick body might not always recover, but the bonds between people grew strong. Illness revealed kindness, suffering sharpened mercy, and compassion turned sorrow into strength. Thus, in the medieval world, healing was not only herb and blade, prayer and charm, but hands joined, bread shared, prayers spoken in unison. It was a reminder that no one lived or died alone, but within a web of care that reached from cradle to grave. And so, the story of medieval healing closes with this truth. The greatest medicine was love, carried not in bag of surgeon or jar of wise woman, but in hearts of neighbors, in voices of community, in mercy that bound fragile lives together. The medieval world lived by the rhythm of the seasons, and healing followed that same wheel of time. What herbs were gathered, what foods were eaten, what prayers were said, and what remedies were trusted, all changed with the turning of the year. In spring, the land awakened, and so did the body. Physicians often prescribed cleansing at this season. Bloodletting was thought to balance humors stirred by warming sun, washing away heaviness of winter. Families gathered young greens, nettles, dandelions, sorrel, boiled into soups that thinned the blood and brought freshness to weary limbs. Midwives and wise women carried baskets into meadows, plucking first herbs of year, drying them for teas and tinctures to last months ahead. The air itself seemed medicine, damp with rain, alive with birdsong, carrying promise of new life. Spring was also season of pilgrimage. Villagers, shaking off winter's confinement, walked to shrines and holy wells. They dipped cloths into waters believed to cure fevers, left offerings of bread or coin, carried home vials of blessed liquid. The link between nature's renewal and spirit's renewal was clear. To cleanse body and soul together was best safeguard for year to come. Summer brought abundance, but also dangers. The heat was believed to overexcite humors, make bodies prone to fevers and flux. Physicians advised cooling diets, fresh fruits, cucumbers, salads of garden herbs, diluted wine, and plenty of water when it could be trusted. Broths were made lighter, with barley or peas rather than heavy meats. In villages, Mothers watched anxiously for signs of summer sickness in children, quick fevers that stole strength in days. Remedies included mint for stomach, rose water for cooling brow, violets to sweeten air of sick room. But summer was not only danger, it was also season of festivals and marriages, where joy was considered health in itself. Dancing beneath maypoles, feasting on roasted meats, laughing at games, these were thought to lift spirits, and a cheerful heart was believed to balance humors as surely as any herb. Priests reminded people that merriment in measure was medicine of the soul, and so laughter rang out beside coughs, hope carried in music and play. Autumn was the season of gathering. Fields yielded grain, orchards bent with apples and pears, vineyards brimmed with grapes. Families stored food not only for hunger, but for health. Honey was sealed in jars, dried herbs tied in bundles, roots laid in cellars. Barrels of ale and cider were filled, smoked meats hung in rafters, beans and lentils kept in sacks. These stores were medicine against winter, for famine was always the greatest illness of the cold months. Autumn was also season of gratitude. Villages held harvest feasts where prayers of thanks mingled with laughter. In such gatherings, healers shared knowledge of remedies to last the winter, reminding families to dry sage for coughs, to keep garlic against fever, to preserve vinegar for cleansing wounds. Preparation itself was healing, a shield woven from work, foresight, and faith. Winter brought greatest trial. Cold and darkness wore down bodies already thin from labor. Fire became center of life, hearth both warmth and ward against illness. Broths of onions and leeks simmered daily, nourishing and gentle. Bread was baked heavier, grains mixed with whatever could be spared. Wine and ale were drunk warm, spiced with cinnamon or cloves when coin allowed, to heat body against chill. Sickness, however, thrived in winter. Coughs deepened, fevers spread swiftly in crowded homes, and plague sometimes returned with the cold. Healing then was as much about comfort as cure. Blankets piled, prayers whispered, candles lit to bring light into nights that seemed endless. Families huddled together, and presence of love itself became strongest medicine. Yet even in winter there were moments of joy. Christmas Mass filled churches with candlelight, Epiphany processions lifted voices in song, St. Bridget's Day brought flicker of hope at edge of spring. Such feasts healed spirit, teaching that even in darkness, life endured. The seasons turned again, and with them healing. Each year knowledge grew which herbs cured best, which foods preserved longest, which prayers carried most comfort. Children learned from parents, apprentices from masters, villages from monks. Healing was not fixed science, but living rhythm, shaped by rains and snows, by harvests and famines, by faith and memory. For medieval people, the cycle of healing mirrored the cycle of the soul. Spring's cleansing was like confession, summer's joy like grace, Autumn storing like wisdom, winter's endurance like faith. Body and spirit alike move through seasons of growth, trial, and renewal. And so, to speak of medieval medicine is to speak of time itself, of how people healed not only with herbs and knives, but with patience for the wheel of year, trust in rhythm of earth, and hope that after winter's cold, spring would always come again.